Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the BS and Beer Show. BS stands for Building Science. Tonight, we're going to talk about codes, when codes collide and how they work together and how they don't. I am Emily Mottram, for those who don't know, architect here in Maine. Tonight, I am drinking seltzer in my Portland, Oregon koozie. Shout out to my friend Josh for bringing that. BSM Beer is an independent grassroots movement for us to share building science knowledge through our local meetup groups and this, our Zoom show. The brew crew and our guests always volunteer our time each month to bring what we hope is fun and informative discussion. So thank you, Glenn, for sharing your time with us. We encourage you to find a local group, new website updates, easier to find your local group. So go over there, take a look at the website, thebsandbeershow.com for more information. Post your questions and comments in the chat box. We'll make sure that we catch those as we go along with the presentation. You can also find all of our video recordings and audio-only version of the show on our website, thebsandbeershow.com. And finally, thank you to IMW Group and Motif for their help making sure that our media and communications help us spread the word far and wide. Mike, off to you.
Thank you, Emily. I am drinking a New York City Evil Twin Brewing IPA called our most popular IPA, and I think it's named that for a good reason. It's also a very pretty label, which is how I buy beer. For announcements, the Building Science Symposium, Travis's baby, is coming back to KC, where it all started, September 9th and 10th. So register now. We will put a link in the chat box. If you can't make it to that one, there are others coming up. Always a good and it's always a good time and an excellent value. The Fine Home Building Summit, the second one, I can't say second annual, the second one will be held September 18th and 19th in Beverly, Massachusetts. Build is a premier two-day thought leadership event dedicated to the evolution of residential design, construction, and business practices. Bring together some of the most experienced and recognized professionals in their fields. Blah, blah, blah. It's a good time. Many of the presenters you will recognize as past guests on our show, as well as our own Ben Bogey. It's worth going. Get there if you possibly can. The U.S. Heat Pump Summit is coming up in November 18th and 19th in Worcester, Mass. For anybody not from the Northeast, that's spelled Worcester. It's pronounced Worcester. So that is the summit hosts the leading minds across the high-performance HVAC and plumbing world to help you maximize every aspect of your business. And the speaker roster looks pretty great. We will put a link to that in the notes in the chat. And then to tease our next show on September 4th, we just locked in energy guru Mark Rosenbaum. He will probably be discussing daylighting. We will lock it in before then. If he does discuss daylighting, the blurb is, you may think that low energy LEDs make daylighting irrelevant, but Mark will probably convince you otherwise. We just saw a related presentation and it was convincing. If there's anything else to add from the panelists or from the audience, please feel free to put it in the chat, or the panelists want to mention any big events coming up that I missed. Otherwise, I will turn it over to you, Travis.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, we'll drop those in the chat. I'm sure that Glenn's got a number of teaching engagements that he'll want to share there. You can always find him where I tell you in just a second. First, I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Travis Brungard. I'm a builder at Catalyst Construction in Prairie Village, Kansas. I am double fisting it tonight because Glenn's here. I'm celebrating with my last beer. I'm down to just one beer. And before I open that beer, 2 bottles of water. I'm trying to get that 2-to-1 recovery ratio from Building Science Summer Camp. But enough about me. Let's talk about Glenn. Glenn Mathewson is a code educator with audiences ranging from contractors to building officials at both public and private events. And he was awarded the 2021 Educator of the Year, not just by me, but also by the International Code Council. He gets it from me every year. He's the creator of buildingcodecollege.com, where he actively works to grow a catalog of on-demand courses. Glenn started out working in construction and then spent over a decade as a building, plumbing, and mechanical inspector and plan reviewer. So he's one of my people. He's a field guy who's now on the other side. In 2007, he earned a Master Code Professional certification from the International Code Council. He has lots of pens and awards. He's authored over 100 technical articles, as well as at least 1 book, if not more, and then various publications. How many?
3 now.
Three now. So, in addition to those three books, he's also authored over 100 technical articles, as well as some books in various publications for the International Code Council. He's an active participant in the IRC code development hearings and keeps us accountable as builders for not going and just complaining. And those are just a few of Glenn's many accomplishments. So, you get a sense of his expertise. While Glenn didn't include it in his bio, we know that for fun, he enjoys taking off for the Colorado backcountry, and you can find him on the slopes or at these links that Mike will drop into the chat. I would love to know from you directly, Glenn, what are you drinking tonight and what did I miss?
Tonight, I am drinking Stone IPA.
That tracks.
I'm an IPA fan. I'm not hazy or the fruity, just the West Coast IPA. I don't have the cool background you guys have. I'm coming out of Colorado, Denver, kind of Denver metro area. And you got pretty good. I mean, as far as what I do, the most recent exciting things is I've joined the team of authors for the Code Check publications that have been around since the 90s. These are the laminated flip guides that give like very summarized information about code. Those authors have been working on that since the 90s. And so they brought me on board so there can still be a future. They're looking to retire. So hopefully I'll be carrying that Code Check publication on into the future. But we're working on getting the next one published now. Yeah, I love code. I love code history, and I love being a voice to the people. So much code education is just the business, the money that is teaching the regulators, teaching the inspectors. But I love doing things like this and being invited here and being active on social media and being a little bit different of a code educator, maybe not as business minded as others, in that I'm kind of targeting the market that needs to be targeted, whether the money's there or not. And that is the general public. So I'm trying to become, the micro, I guess, if you will, to the people about building codes while continuing to do my professional work in the actual industry. So super excited to be here today and got lots I'm excited to share.
Well, with that, should we kick off the, Glenn, you prepared some slides and you had a presentation you wanted to share with us. Is that ready now?
I did. Yep. And as typical, if anyone's attended my classes, they know I never end early. I always have too many slides for the time. I've already warned the BS gang today. I've got a fair bit of slides. I'm going to move pretty fast through the early ones because they're kind of foundational and they're just like little things I wanted to just get kind of just in your brain just a little bit. And then the last portion, I hope to slow down a little. And I really want to talk about insulation as an ingredient in so many recipes and how it confuses so much of the public. So I'm ready.
Perfect.
All right, let's get into it. We only got so much time. Conflicts of code. So I wanted to have 3 hours to share with you about all the deep, different, crazy ways that there are conflicts in the code. But I only got 60 minutes. So the first 3 are going to be just kind of plugging it in your brain, and then we'll get into some other stuff. This is my little collage introduction, but we don't need to spend time on that. Travis did a great job. Hello, I'm Glenn Mathewson. All right. So what's the agenda for today? What 4 different subjects of conflict are we going to talk about? Government is the first one. And just to let you know, there are 4 presidents mentioned in this, 2 from each party. So we don't have to go there, if you know what I mean. All right. That is a big part of code and a conflict of it. Frankenstein. We'll talk about why Frankenstein is so complicated for code. We'll talk about power and who holds the power and the fight for power. And then I'll talk to you, the important part, the part I really want to get into more technical stuff a little bit with you, are recipes, right? And show you how the code book, yes, it's rules of the government telling you what to do. That's part of it. But then the rest of the code book is a big, massive gift to the people to say, hey, you want to just go build yourself a simple, basic little home? You want some human shelter? You want the American dream? Here's the code book. It's got recipes for you that you can follow, and you'll be assured to build a house that satisfies the code. And no one in the public really recognizes or looks at the code in that way. And that's, I think, where the confusion that comes into play is everyone's seeing the code as being told what to do. And then they look at it and go, well, wait, you're telling me what to do isn't matching. And that's because you're not looking at the code the right way. All right, now if this was vague and confusing to you, Frankenstein and cookbooks, that's intentional because I want to surprise you, right? So there's the agenda of the class. So first of all, federal government, right, does not have authority over building codes. The United States of America, right? Constitution, 10th Amendment, states' rights. If it's not just directly in the Constitution granting the authority of the federal government, it goes to the states. And if the states don't want it, it goes to the people. That said, well, everyone loves a little power if they can get it, right? So you have the Department of Commerce. That affects construction, and construction affects code. The Environmental Protection Agency, authority over construction, code. Department of Energy, Consumer Product Safety Commission, Federal Housing Administration. These are all branches, agencies, departments of the federal government that make code complicated, that create conflict with the way the code is developed through the centuries-old open process for everyone to be involved where we develop the code. So federal government can't write codes, doesn't have authority in the Constitution, but they absolutely have ways of having authority. And one of the big ones, I kind of hinted it was coming, is presidential administration and presidential policy. Like we should all understand in today's administration and all of them in the past, the president is voted in and he leads the policy and tries to guide the Congress. And that's what happens. That affects code. And so here's an example of one. Let's go back to 1921 and Herbert Hoover recognized a shortage of 1.2 million homes in the United States. And notice, talking about the stagnated condition of the building industry, you could almost read that quote and think it came out of 2025. I bet a lot of you might believe that or might see that in your area. So history tends to repeat itself. A lot of this stuff we still are experiencing today. So what did Herbert Hoover do? He created the Building Code Committee from the U.S. Department of Commerce. That was the early first ever residential code created by the federal government. But notice the titles on here: recommended minimum requirements for small dwelling construction. Recommended because they have no authority. They have money, they have resources, and they can see the need of the nation. So they developed these to try to encourage states. And really at this time, it was more local governments. State governments weren't creating statewide codes so much 100 years ago. But trying to say, hey, follow our recommendations on code. So move forward to happened to be the very next president, flip parties, as we always do through the history of this country. And what did FDR do? He was behind the signing of the 1934 National Housing Act, right? To encourage improvement in, what does this say? Housing standards. Sounds like code. And so what came out of that? The FHA. And the FHA had 8 goals. This is a lot of my historical documents. The FHA had 8 listed goals here. And what was the 8th goal of the FHA plan for homeownership? Improvement of housing standards and conditions. And that's what led to the property mortgage standards, or minimum property standards, excuse me, MPS, minimum property standards. And in my full history classes, that became sort of the de facto building code in the US for homes, because home builders knew that if they wanted buyers, these buyers want to use these big 20, 30, 25-year mortgages, they better do what the federal government says. So again, there were codes at that time, but then federal codes as well. But notice the authority comes from different places. Move way forward in time, oil embargo. If you're not familiar with that history, go read it up, because that's what kicked off really the movement of energy codes and where we are today. Big national energy scare in the US. We pissed off the wrong people across the nation. History repeats itself. A lot of same kind of things happening today. And we were worried about energy, and the states were worried about energy. And so the states said, federal government, help us. So what you're seeing right here is design and evaluation criteria for energy conservation in new buildings. This is literally like the night out on the town that led to the energy code being put in the womb. This is as early as you get on that. And what was it? It was down here, you notice in the corner, the National Conference of States. The states were going, We don't know how to handle this energy crisis. Papa federal government with all the money and resources, help us. And so you can see Department of Commerce, National Bureau of Standards prepared this document for the states as a basis for how an energy code should be later created. Then this is a document, this is a picture from inside that document. There's a reason that this is foreshadowing to what's coming, to show you that even before there was a standard or a code, there was just a conceptual idea of energy regulation. Notice 3 paths to approval. Wait, I thought the code just told you what to do. Shut your mouth and do what I tell you. I'm the government. No, from the very beginning, 3 paths, choices, choices, choices to the people. Move along to our next president. Shift parties again. And there you go. That is the father of United States energy codes right there, President Gerald Ford. He was the one who said, I quote, "We need to make legislation to mandate thermal energy efficiency standards for all new buildings in the United States." Hello, father of US energy codes. He did not get what he wanted. There's a whole lot to that story, but he was absolutely able to get acts passed that provided the funding. And funding means resources, right? Often when I say resources, I am talking about research and smart people. But how do you get research and smart people? With money. So ultimately, that's really it. Hey, that's the year I was born. I'm actually a few months older than the first ever model energy code in the US. But notice it was prepared for the US Department of Energy because they paid for it to be created per the direction of the presidential administration at the time. Move forward, ResNet, HERS rating, that all started from federal government funding. Energy Star programs, all federal government funding. That is all just the nature of so much conflict that gets created because money talks, doesn't it? Yes, it does. Final president to speak of and final involvement of federal government. That brings us to modern stuff happening today, the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. And what did this act do? It encourages now even further, this has been happening since about 2006, funding states to move and to update their energy code. So in this act, they provide funds for state governments to move to an energy code that meets or exceeds the 2021 energy code. That's why many of us are seeing across the country energy codes moving forward. Why is this a conflict? What about all the other codes? They all work together. They're meant to work together. A building is not an island. Energy is not independent of all the other systems in the home. But energy is funded. So what we see a lot of states have done, and we're hopefully going to be moving. Hope there's a bad thing, but where they are moving forward their energy codes because it's funded by the federal government, but then they don't move forward their old codes. They stay on older editions of building codes. And that creates conflict within the family of codes. And it's why is this such a strong encouragement? Because of $1 billion. I didn't do my segue of my joke there very well, like the only joke in the class. But yes, that act earmarks $1 billion to the states to do that. So when I say money talks, and it creates conflict. And so you can see here, out of that $1 billion, 670 million of that 1 billion is earmarked only for the states that go to zero energy codes. And does anyone wonder, maybe perhaps connecting the dots? I don't know. Notice a lot of states are banning natural gas and propane. Natural gas and propane is non-renewable. You can't go zero energy in that path. So I'll leave that to all of you to wonder sometimes the mechanisms behind code adoption in the US. All right, so let's get out of that. That's federal government. So much more to share there, but enough to get your brains realizing, wow, maybe there's a lot more involved than we realized. International Residential Code, the cookbook for single-family homes. The history of this starts from that recommended standards from the Building Code Committee back in the 1930s, and the property standards for FHA, and then this 1 and 2 family dwelling code that was created. And then finally in 2000, you get the International Residential Code. And at that time now we include plumbing, mechanical, building codes, and electrical codes in that one IRC. But where do some of these codes come from? Well, in the 2024 IRC, all of your energy codes are in Chapter 11, but they come directly from the Energy Code, a different code book, different hearing process, different professionals involved and interested and motivated and financed to create the next edition than all the other chapters of the IRC. What about fuel gas? That, like I said, some states are moving to banning. Well, we still have fuel gas codes. That's the International Fuel Gas Code, a standalone fuel gas code. And all of the fuel gas codes in the IRC aren't created by the IRC process. They are just copied from the International Fuel Gas Code and then plugged in to Chapter 24, created through different people, different committees, different motivation, different finances. And then, of course, electrical codes, y'all are probably all familiar with. That has been, the purview of the National Fire Protection Association ever since taking it over from the National Board of Fire Underwriters. It was actually the insurance industry that first created the electrical code. But that's from the late 1800s. NFPA has been involved nearly the entire time. And so NFPA publishes the National Electrical Code. And all of the electrical codes for housing get just pulled out of that and plugged into chapters 34 to 43. But all this stuff is created, like I said, separate people, separate motivations, separate times, separate processes. Do you think that creates conflict when it's all supposed to work together? Well, that's the message I'm sending. So, but hey, let's get even further. Before ICC, you had IAPMO, the International Association of Plumbing and Mechanical Officials. And they were writing a plumbing and mechanical code that lots of states and local governments across the country were adopting. Well, when ICC formed from multiple organizations, they started creating their own plumbing codes. So there are plumbing and mechanical codes in the IRC created in different committees by different people with different motivations and different finances. And yet some states and some governments are like, no, we've been using the IAPMO plumbing and mechanical codes forever. So we want to stick with those. So when they adopt the IRC, they scratch all the plumbing and mechanical in that book, and they make you go over to these other code books created through different people, different processes at different times with different finances. Reference standards and referenced codes. So the IRC also knows that people have swimming pools at their house. So it references you to the swimming pool and spa code. And you got to use that code for your pool. It also knows that homes need property maintenance. So the IRC points you out and says, comply with the property maintenance code. Different code, different time, created by different people. And then, of course, you have the International Private Sewage Disposal Code if you're doing a septic system. But maybe this, like Colorado, doesn't use that. They have their own state-created septic codes in Colorado. More confusion, more codes, more potential conflict. And then finally, you have other codes that get adopted by jurisdictions that do have codes that apply to the houses you're building under the IRC, but you don't get that information in the IRC. The International Fire Code does not really apply to single-family homes except one small part about the exterior of the house, addressing of the house, etc. But you won't find it in the IRC. And then the Wildland Urban Interface Code, becoming one of the more popular and current event type of codes due to all the wildfires. And then finally, you have the International Existing Building Code. And this has modified provisions for existing buildings. You could use that for IRC buildings, but the IRC also has Appendix BO, which is for existing buildings, and it will modify parts of the main code. Big old mess, and we're not done. The IRC also points you to reference standards like field treating the ends of treated lumber when you cut it according to the AWPA M4 standard. Go find that standard. Does it work well with the code? Then you also get manufacturer's installation instructions. Tons of times throughout the code that tells you install per manufacturer's installation instruction. But what are those instructions going to say compared to what the code says? And now with all that done, I would like to introduce you to Frankenstein. A monster built over many centuries for many different people and parts and pieces of humans from all across the land patched together into this one operating creature. Okay, well, that was fun. Hope you guys enjoyed that. That's the monster of conflict that occurs with the IRC, and why I refer to the IRC as Frankenstein. And yes, to you literary professional Karens on the line, Frankenstein's monster. I know. Dr. Frankenstein. All right. So power, and then we'll get to what I really want to get you to. This is a one-slide one here for you. Who's got the power? This is where the code actually writes out it plays arbitrator for conflict, written in the body of the code. And what it says is this. It says, all right, you might be reading this big old book, and you've got some general requirements, provisions, requirements, either way. Provision being like the prescriptive design, requirement, right? You have to do it. There's general things like a code section often starts out with a very general, broad, wide-reaching statement. And then it will go on with a little more detail and specification, like exceptions are a big one. You'll get exceptions. Well, under this particular condition, then this is the rule. And so those things will often conflict with each other. And it happens because of our confirmation bias. We all do it. We just have different biases. But we read and look to things, and when we find what we wanted, we often stop. And both the free public does this, and both the authority does this. They'll start reading that general provision. They'll find something they wanted to find, and they stop reading. That's one of the biggest mistakes in understanding code. Read the whole thing, because often that's what you get, general and specific, and they contradict each other, and the code tells you if that happens, specific provisions rule. They have the power, and that makes sense, right? You might have a blanket curfew for your teenager or something. But then there's some big special event, a Magic the Gathering card competition, some special event that's going to run late, and your child says, okay, but under this particular situation and scenario, can I stay out a little later? And, you know, if you're not a jerk parent, you might be like, yeah, all right, that's more specific. We'll let that rule just for tonight. Okay, sometimes you get specific, and they contradict. What the heck do you do then? Well, the code tells you, you go with the most restrictive. Now, I'm going to play a little different word on that for you and say another way you could look at that is satisfy both. And that's going to come up a little bit later. I'm forecasting or whatever, foreshadowing to you. So you remember that. Sometimes you get requirements, rules of how big something has to be or whatever. And then you would go with the most restrictive, right, to keep you the safest. But when it comes to prescriptive design and you have different design options, sometimes you get two different design options that both have a requirement for the same thing. And that's where you wouldn't necessarily go with most restrictive. You would go with the choice that satisfies them both. Make sense? Okay. And then there's reference standards where the code references you out. I mentioned like the AWPA standard for field treatment, where the code references you out to other documents. And sometimes there's conflict there because those standards are written by other people, organizations, and you know what I mean, motivations, everything, total different thing. Who wins in a conflict there? The code provisions win in that conflict. And then finally, between code provisions and manufacturer's instructions. And a lot of people get surprised by this, even people in the code industry, because the answer is manufacturer's instructions. Now, the response in a live class with more interaction, people go, well, wait a minute. So then a manufacturer can just write whatever they want in the instructions, even if it's just violates code, like a guard manufacturer, just 20 inches high is fine. Code says 36. But you have to understand, any product has to be approved first. A product can be approved through a reference standard, an established test standard of that product. And that established test standard is going to test that product the way it's installed. And those installation instructions are critical to what's called the listing of that test result. Well, you have to show you've achieved compliance with that standard to get that product approved by the building official. And to do that, your instructions are going to have to match with how you tested it that match with a successful result that satisfies the code. And so that's kind of the explanation, that if you had some bogus manufacturer instructions, it's probably a bogus product that doesn't have the ability to prove its value to be approved by the building official or by the required test standard. So that's what that, legit products that have been approved, those instructions are going to trump over code. All right. And finally, the part I want to get to. Let's see. That took me a little longer than I want. It's because their intro. They spent too long on the intro to this whole thing. All right. So this is what I really wanted to get you guys to understanding here. One of the big conflicts that I feel like the public misunderstands. Insulation is an ingredient in many recipes in the code. Just like eggs are an ingredient in many recipes you'll find in this new cookbook. Okay. And you might find recipes for an appetizer that includes eggs, and a main dish that includes eggs, and a dessert that includes eggs. But those are three independent recipes. You free American home party dinner preparer, you get to pick whatever appetizer, main course, dessert that you want to pick. If you happen to pick ones that all require eggs, you have to be the one to make a list of how many eggs you need total and go to the store, because you picked those three recipes with a similar ingredient. But right, your appetizer, your main dish, your dessert, they serve completely different functions, right? Just like your house may be foundation protection, thermal insulation, condensation control. Three totally different things in one meal, right? The house, the meal, three different recipes. Insulation might be in all three. But those recipes, like the appetizer and the meal and the dessert, they don't care about each other, because you are the one that picked the three independently. All right, so if you don't understand what I'm saying, let's see if I can bring you home through the rest of these pictures. So what does insulation do in these recipes? It slows the movement of heat, right? That's what insulation does. It slows the movement of heat. Just like eggs probably have some fundamental to them that, that we need the egg in the recipe because of what the egg does, okay? But why are we slowing the movement of heat? Because that could be totally different reasons. Just like the eggs in your recipes could be for totally different purposes. The code is giving you, right, the freedom to make your own choices. If there's anything you take away from here in this today, it's realize there's so much more of a gift to you in the code. And the code is so complicated because it wants to define the minimum standard with a fine single horsehair, right? Because the minimum line of code is the maximum line of freedom, which is why I think you guys should probably want to know what that line is, right? And so you've heard that saying, right? With freedom comes great responsibility, right? That's true. That means you have the freedom to pick all your different recipes that this book provides, from vapor control to plumbing recipes, electrical recipes, all this stuff. But then you have the responsibility now to make sure they all work together, right? Like, maybe don't put too much cheese in, like, don't give me queso with like cheesy lasagna with like a cheesy dinner. You might have overdone the cheese. That's your responsibility. So that was a bad analogy. So let's see what kind of recipes we get and how the code is so specific to only give you what you need for each independent recipe, independent of each other. And that's a freedom to you. 4 recipes for frost protection. There you go. There's 4 of them right there. What people say, code is the worst you can build and still be legal. And that is the most ignorant. When people say that, I know that they don't know anything about code, because there's 4 choices. So which of those choices is the worst? See how that works? See how that just kind of kills that whole line? You get to pick from these 4. Well, 2 of those choices to protect the foundation from frost heat include insulation. So if you pick those, that's going to be on your list only for this recipe. This recipe isn't thinking about any of the other recipes, only it. Okay. So shallow frost protected foundations is what this is about. You've got heat in the ground. You've got cold air. This is chapter 4, foundations. Sounds like energy code stuff. No, it's chapter 4, foundations. It doesn't use climate zone. It uses air freezing index. Air freezing index is basically it's how many days out of a year are below 32 degrees. Okay, and then so the more days out of the year that it's below 32 degrees, the more you're pulling the heat out of the ground, and the lower and lower that frost depth is. You know, when you have to dig down a certain depth to get below frost depth? Well, this approach is saying, all right, you have this heated structure with more than 64-degree air over here, and then you have this cold air outside. So we're losing heat from the ground. We're also losing heat from underneath the house from the ground. But if we lose heat from the ground, we're gaining the potential of frost heave. So we have to go deeper and deeper with our foundation. This idea is saying, all right, let's use this detail from the code, chapter 4, you can see figure 4, and notice it's using insulation. It says vertical insulation and horizontal insulation. And the goal of that now is to put that insulation in here, you know, my rough illustrations. And notice how now we have cut off, or we have slowed the heat loss coming from underneath this building area. Well, if we've slowed the heat loss from underneath the earth that the building is sitting on, then we're keeping it warmer. And what are we doing? We're raising the frost line. We're raising it to a point where you don't have to dig all the way down to the frost line anymore, because you've trapped the heat into the ground. So again, insulation retards the movement of heat, but how and why? So we'll go to this table, chapter 4. Look, it's all about insulation, but why? For frost protection. And so we get insulation values of R4.5, R10, and horizontal insulation values here. And notice what we see in this footnote down here. Greater values could be required to meet energy conservation standards. This is like the cheese in your queso appetizer. If you were so silly as to think that that recipe had anything to do with the main dish, it would be like your queso recipe saying, the lasagna you make for the main dish may require some more cheese than what this recipe requires. That would be silly though, wouldn't it? Because we understand separate recipes in a cookbook. Now you understand these are individual separate recipes, and you get the freedom to pick and choose and connect them all together, but then you have to know your ingredients list. Take a note at this, look. This is the 2024. Now watch. That's the 2000 edition. This was in the original 2000. That's 25 years ago. Notice the R values have not changed a single bit. So, oh, here you go, bring up that box, right? R values haven't changed a single bit. Why? Because what's the purpose of this insulation? Why? For frost heave. So is climate change real? Is climate change not real? I don't know. But I can tell you that in 25 years, it hasn't changed the science of heat movement sufficiently that these R values of insulation have changed at all, because this is all that it's trying to achieve. All right, energy code, right? Comfort, convenience, low bills. There's 4 options for energy conservation methods. 4 different options here. Now this boxed options I've boxed here is called the prescriptive option, and that's where I refer to the recipes. That aligns with the concept of just providing you a recipe. Put this R value here, this R value here, boom, boom, boom. Simple, easy, and done, okay? But just like a recipe in a cookbook is going to be limited to what's in that cookbook. Like, you're not going to get super fancy. You're going to do what's in there. It's going to be simplified stuff. Like you find pretty basic meals in these cookbooks. So same thing, the prescriptive energy is very basic. It's very one size fits all. Is it going to fit you? Maybe not. So there's 2 other options here, the simulated building performance and the energy rating option. This is now like saying, I don't want to make green bean casserole again from that cookbook. I want to hire a chef to come for the party tonight. We're going to hire a chef that comes and makes totally unique meals with no recipes. Or maybe you're going to make the meal, but you hire the chef to give you a custom, unique recipe. That's a choice that the energy code gives you. And that's what I was bringing up from that earlier document. The code gave you those choices back in the 1970s when the whole idea of energy code was first born. Give them a recipe and then give them an ability to do energy modeling, to do design. If you want more freedom and more flexibility than what the recipe provides you, then you have to go spend a little more money and do more work and have the third-party person do more calculations, and that'll yield you more freedom and flexibility in design. So let's look at a prescriptive insulation requirement, slab edge insulation. Hey, look, doesn't that look kind of right where the insulation was for frost protection? Similar location, similar place. That's it. Get it out of your head. It's a different recipe. So just because it's in a similar place doesn't mean it's going to correlate at all. It won't at all with the frost protection recipe, because the code doesn't know that you have decided to put those two together, even though it's very similar. So this is energy code now. This is based on climate zone, not air freezing index. Okay, so here we now go, now we're in chapter 11, and now we have the plug in prescriptive recipe, just put this R value in. And we can see here for slab depth, it's at R10 continuous for all of the climate zones. The other one we looked at for frost protection varied from like 4.5 to 10.1 because it's for frost protection. 2 feet to 4 foot deep. Why though? What's energy code for? Not protecting your foundation, for comfort, convenience of your house, your thermostat, keeping everything nice and comfy for you all the time. And obviously saving money on energy bills. The insulation here, now we're looking back at the frost protection foundation. This insulation is for a different purpose. It's in a different recipe. It has a different depth, as you can see over here. It just happens to be, it uses the same ingredient as that other, energy conservation recipe over there. But that's it. They just use a similar ingredient. So here we can see horizontal insulation can be used for frost protected foundations. In fact, you get the whole detail. Like I showed you this one showing horizontal. You get another detail with different distances that you have to horizontally project out from the house. Let's flip back to energy code. Maybe we can do one thing that will solve both, right? Like I said, the more restrictive, and I said, no, maybe just pick something insulation value that will solve both of your recipes, right? So we look back at this upper language here for slab on grade floors is from the 2024 IRC. And here it tells us where a proposed design includes insulation extending away from the building. Hey, like horizontal insulation extending away. But notice it says the vertical distance from that table I showed you. I showed you the table is R10 with the depth of 2 to 4 feet. Depth means vertical, 2 to 4 feet. The recipe says you got to go vertical with that insulation. The recipe for frost protected says no, you got to go horizontal also with that insulation. Go back to the energy conservation code. It says you have to do a proposed design if you want to do insulation horizontally that counts for your energy conservation recipe. A proposed design means the chef. It means the simulator performance method or the HERS rating method. So it's essentially saying, okay, the recipe for frost protection includes horizontal insulation, but the recipe for energy, the prescriptive recipe for energy conservation, for comfort, keeping our energy bills down, it doesn't allow horizontal insulation. You would have to shift over to a different recipe, the simulator performance or the HERS rating, the ERI rating, if you wanted to do horizontal. But again, you get the flexibility and choices for that. The reason I wanted to bring this up is just to show you this next thing. These recipes are always changing, right? I already told you, because of the different people with different motivations at different time periods, different finances, to change these things. And we don't always know everybody's motivation. This is that same code section in 2021 before it was changed in 2024. And notice the difference. In 2021, the prescriptive recipe, just do what it says and be done, said it could be any combination of vertical or horizontal extending. So in 2021, you could use a recipe for horizontal, for foundation protection, and for energy conservation. 2024, they took away, they made the prescriptive method a little less flexible. They took away the ability to do horizontal, but you can still do it. You just have to use one of the other compliance methods. Tricky stuff. Okay. But now you changed things up. Now you decided we want to do in-floor radiant heat, slab on grade. That's your choice, free American. Rock on. And the code says, we got a recipe for that. We're going to change the recipe a little bit. Because now if you have a heated slab, you are directly losing heat into the ground. And the energy code's like, you know, we were cool with not insulating the ground when you weren't like putting a hot concrete directly against it. But now that you're doing that, cool, that's cool. You got to do something more, right? You got to go back to this table, the recipe, and now you look here. Now there's a different recipe, heated slab, because you made a choice. And so now it's to add an additional R5 under the entire slab. Right? So now you've insulated under that slab so you help keep the heat from the building that you're using energy for. We want to conserve that energy and we don't want to bleed it into the ground. And so now you've done that with the insulation. Okay, hold on. Now this is making me think about something. I forgot. We got to go back to the frost protection because there's a second recipe. Remember I said there were two recipes that use insulation, and that whole heated slab insulation, you know, it reminded me of that. See, this recipe says you can use this standard from the American Society of Civil Engineers. It's back in '01. Design construction for frost protected shallow foundations. This is what the IRC method is built on for heated structures only. This has been reaffirmed for 2025 and republished, so it's still an active standard. They just reaffirmed it. They didn't change it. And this allows you, if you follow this recipe, you can do shallow frost protected prescriptive design for an unheated structure. And that gets people confused. But why, right? Okay, why? Well, guess what? Is similar insulation location, exact same insulation location. Totally different recipe, totally different purpose. For the heated slab, we were worried about the heat we generate in the house going into the earth. For the frost protected of an unheated building, now you have cold air everywhere. So now we're insulating the slab for a different reason, to block the heat into the ground and keep it from spilling into the building. Same insulation, same location, complete, same purpose, retard the movement of energy, but absolutely complete, as different as queso and lasagna. And if you want more details on that, little nod to Fine Home Building, I write Know the Code in every edition, and I wrote all about frost-protected foundations, including that reference standard. There you go, back issue 297. All right, one last thing to wrap through. Sorry, BS and Beer guys, I did it again. The last little thing, vapor control. You got vapor control in your floors, chapter 4, in your concrete, underneath your elevated floors, chapter 4, underneath your slab on grade concrete, chapter 5, inside your wall assemblies, chapter 7, roofs, attic assemblies, chapter 8, condensation control. Typically vapor retarders, right? We've been using those all along. And back in the day, you had no choices. It was poly. Now the code gives you 3 options for vapor retarders, but then that's your choice, right? And so what you pick there may or may not mesh with what you pick for frost protection or what you pick for energy code. That's your responsibility to make it mesh. We're in a different recipe now. And then there's actually more recipes embedded into this recipe, like continuous exterior insulation for vapor control when you use a class 3 vapor retarder, which is like paint. Okay, so real quick, hold on, let's go back. Here you see all these insulation values. You get a continuous insulation value, and then you get a size of a wall, assuming a certain cavity value. So you get all these insulation values, but it's chapter 7. It's not energy code chapter 11. And just like the footnote in the frost protection telling you, hey, this queso recipe isn't giving you enough cheese for your lasagna, dummy, it's kind of saying the same thing here. Look, the requirements in this table, the insulation is only for moisture control. And it goes on to say that it will satisfy the envelope requirements in Energy Code Chapter 11. It will contribute towards that, but you got to determine how you picked your Energy Code design to mesh with this design if you choose this. So, right, continuous exterior insulation, you just look at that. What is it for? Is that for thermal comfort? Well, probably add to that. Or is it for condensation control? Because it could be for one or the other, or it could be for both. But that's the freedom the code gives you to figure out, right? So just to wrap this up with the concept of how insulation does this, you have a class 3 vapor retarder, so you're getting a lot more humidity into the wall, which means you can't handle as cold of temperatures. And so you've got, let's say, 40 degrees on the inside of the sheathing, and you're going to get condensation. So because you don't have a good, robust vapor retarder on the inside, you have a class 3. So what do? You add insulation. Now that keeps that sheathing warmer. It's not keeping you, it doesn't care about how warm you are in the house. That's chapter 11. It cares only enough insulation, just enough to keep the inside of that sheathing warm enough that it doesn't condense to liquid water. Okay, but now you go to energy code and you say, well, I'm going to bump to a 2x6 wall, and I'm going to build more thermal comfort in the cavity. Chapter 11, comfort energy bills of my occupant. Now, how did that just affect your recipe for vapor control? Well, you just put more insulation on the side that you need the heat to come from. So that means because you made that choice in energy code, you're going to have to go back now and bump up your choice in vapor control code to put more insulation on the outside so you can still keep that inside sheathing warm. I call this the battle of the dew point, where this insulation is good. You want insulation to keep you from losing heat for the comfort of the occupant, energy code. But then you kind of need enough heat to come through that you get some warmth on the backside of that sheathing. But at the same time, you're losing heat out the other side. So you have to balance insulation here to hold back the heat depending on how much you're holding back the heat in the cavity. And so this is where, as a snowboarder, I bring up this design. You're going to get a shell, right? It's windproof, air barrier. It's got venting zippers, windows, ventilation. It's got a breathable waterproof fabric, vapor control management. That's IRC chapters, not energy code. But then separately, you might choose a thermal insulation to use because you want to satisfy energy code. You want to be warm, right? But these choices have to go together. If you buy the bibs with insulation in them, then you probably don't need the added insulation, right? But see my analogy. Think the same way with these. I use recipes, now I'm using clothing. They're separate choices that have to work together, and you get the freedom to make those choices. And then last two things to show you, just to throw you off even more crazy. Here's a new appendix in 2024. Extended wall plate construction. Look, foam plastic insulating sheathing. This sheathing is in a structural application now. That's a different recipe. That's a different purpose. That's a different function. That's like beyond dessert, appetizers, or anything. So then this insulation is going to need to follow the rules in here for the structural part. It may contribute to your energy code chapter 11, and you would probably try to utilize it some way in a vapor management design as well. 3 different recipes, 1 ingredient. And then tiny houses. You want to build a tiny house? Tiny house appendix chapter is going to alter the energy code requirements. It's not confusing. It's not contradictory. It's that you picked something different, pre-American, and then the code is giving you something else to go with it. Dang it, I used the whole hour up, man. I'm so sorry, guys. That was not my plan.
It's totally fine. And for anybody who has a heart out, please feel free to leave. We're gonna let it open a couple extra minutes because we love Glenn, so we're gonna throw some questions out there.
Please, I'm not going anywhere. I haven't even had my beer this whole time.
Get to drinking, Glenn.
Glenn, I want to see you on the slopes in that pink set of bibs, though. I think cropping your face out of that image is an unjust choice.
That would be a good bit of humor to add in for sure.
I have to do it, but that was a great presentation, and I'm sure the questions will keep you on fire for a bit. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Travis.
That's okay, Glenn. This was a fabulous presentation and lots of work on your part and just tons and tons of information, enough to confuse everybody pretty well, but also generate lots of discussion. My own sort of just not pet peeve, but just because I like using concrete free slabs when possible. It's been interesting that because the code doesn't explicitly allow it, it occasionally it is not accepted without engineer's approval. But the building codes never defines slab as being concrete. So, like, what do you think about slabs, and do you think they'll work their way in at some point?
Are you talking like wood, like floating wood floors on grade? There actually is a section in the code for wood floors on grade.
Okay.
It's a very old section. Most people don't know that it's there. I do think that as anything gains popularity and then it gains presence in the construction industry, I will naturally expect it to end up recognized in the code at some point in time. Yeah. However, that requires a human motivated to do it. So, like, you could write a proposal. You could be the one, Mike. You could be the guy that gets that in the code. If not, you're basically waiting for another human being to be motivated to do that. And I'm sorry, right. Like, a lot of motivation comes from return on the investment. And so that's where we see a lot of codes. If somebody made a product that they could sell that served that type of floating slab, I guarantee that would be more motivation that person would try to get it recognized in the code. Alternatively, it becomes mainstream. Maybe the National Home Builders Association says, hey, a lot of our builders are wanting to do this and they're having trouble with building departments. And so they're always attending the hearings and proposing recipes. One
viewpoint that was pretty popular in the chat is represented particularly consistently from Steve Mercer. He says basically codes are too damn complicated. Throw the whole book in the trash. And somebody else, Andrew Wall, said the books are so expensive, most do not buy them. They build it and hope the inspector passes. Contradicting that, Jay Michno says the ICC digital codes are free and relatively easy to use at iccsafe.org. Those are the ones I reference every single day.
Yeah. So I am a professional building code educator and consultant in the code industry. I had my 20th anniversary. And I use the free online code viewing, because I don't have a corporation to pay. Like, I got to pay for everything, right. And I love buying and collecting the historic code books, and I always usually try to buy a new suite of codes, but the online ones are great. I mean, like I said, just so that anyone thinks it's cheap or you're getting some lesser product that's not going to be useful. Again, I teach codes for a living. I consult for a living. And that is a resource I use. Excellent resource. The comment about throwing the whole code away and it being too complicated, I can understand that. A little quick history nerd, but I'll keep it quick. But the whole concept of the IRC was fundamentally created, like back in the 40s, when the building code organization started making things called simplified pamphlets for house dwelling construction. And they were trying to give the American people a way to not have to hire a design professional, to be able to just follow the recipe, right? Basic, you know, the American dream: build your own house, go buy some lumber, using all common products, common materials. And truthfully, the American people, I believe, have changed. Like I still hold on to that dream, and I am still a speaker of that dream. But it's true. The county I live in, like, I have designed to future build of a house that I'm building completely prescriptive. I mean, that's what I do. Like, so, like, why not? You know. And my county has adopted the IRC with all these recipes. My location is within the wind speed and snow loads of those recipes. And yet that very county has a blanket statement on their website that all single housing plans have to be submitted with an engineered seal. Now, I'm going to be a thorn in their side when I go to permit that house, because I'm going to look them and say, why did you adopt all these recipes? They even put amendments in their code to eliminate the staple. There's provisions of recipes to staple your wood structural panel sheathing. For whatever reason, they didn't like that, so they struck it out. And I'm going to look them dead in the eye and go, why are you even manipulating the recipes if you're not going to let me use them and then mandate I get an engineer? And the point of sharing that story is we, the people, have allowed this to happen. We have let our governments, we have let ourselves, the construction industry, forgive me, the professional who probably uses a design professional who says he doesn't like the code, scratch it. Well, bro, it's not for you then. And so don't scratch it for everyone else that might just want to build a basic rectangle house and use the code. Now, what I can see as a good thing, and I have suggested this to ICC, I would love to see the IRC split into 2 books. Not to buy more books, online for free. IRC mandatory. That's chapter 3 for building code. You're pretty much mandatory with what's in chapter 3. And then a lot of your plumbing and electrical codes and your trade codes, there's a lot less choice in those things. And then take all this prescriptive recipes for floors and walls and foundations and roofs, put it in a completely separate book that's IRC prescriptive design. You will cut more pages, well, maybe not more, it'd be about 50-50. You could cut that IRC into half so that people that use a design professional just because they want to, or because they're in a region with wind or snow loads that require it, then they can just have the simplified IRC that tells them what to do with none of the optional choices and recipes and prescriptive design. But then those that want to not hire an engineer and just build a basic house, my dream, I can then use the other books. That's where I would agree with the gentleman who said it's too complicated, scrap it all. Obviously, he's not using it. But, you know, other people might. So let's not scrap it. A lot of words on that. I'll stop.
Yeah.
No, I think you actually answered some of the other questions that were on there, which is, look at that. Is it any wonder why it's so hard to get things built and they're twice as unaffordable? Or having to have all of these products tested in order to get into the code adds cost because all of these manufacturers have to have these product testing, et cetera, right? So the other underlying factor is, you know, it's complicated, throw it out, don't want to buy the books, was it adds a lot more cost to it. And I think you just gave a really great example there on how to do it. And it also went back to something that was listed at the beginning, and it was probably before you got to it, and it got answered in the chat, which was, what do you do when you are doing something like passive house and there are limitations in the chart version, right? And I think what you just said is true, is like, that's not for you, because if you energy model it, you can get a submission for that says, okay, here's how my building actually performs. I did this energy model on it. And, you know, you can get away from the chart that says just this one thing, right? Like, exactly. That's not for you anymore.
Exactly. And that's what folks, I love the way you said that. That's not for you. The code can serve many different styles of human expectations of grandeur or simple And there's a path for each one, and people just need to understand if they're using the right paths. Like I helped write all the deck codes, right? Just quick note on deck codes. I've been involved with all the new prescriptive deck codes. But a lot of like the deck builders I know are building artistic stuff that's like, dude, you are in design professional world. The prescriptive deck codes that are brand new aren't for every deck that gets built. They're to help people build just pretty basic decks. And so similar thing, you know, with the houses. Passive house should not be even looking at the prescriptive method like at all. One thing I want to say about test standards. So as a code historian, I'm big about positive and proactive. That's why I'm an educator in code. I know I'm in an industry full of negativity, and a lot of that is because there's lacking education. So that's why I want to be here. One of my sayings is this: test standards promote freedom. And people are like, what the hell are you talking about? Test standards are like rules we have to comply with. No, be a historian of code. I'll give you one example: tempered glass safety glazing. You go back prior to the 1970s, and the building code in locations where you have a higher probability of tripping and falling, stairs, ramps, wet surfaces, in hitting glass, nearby glass had to be tempered glass. Go back in the day. It told you exactly, oh, your window? You have no choice, buddy. No choice. Tempered glass, shut your mouth. Code changed in the 70s to reference ANCZ 71.1 or something. And then there's a Consumer Product Safety Commission standard related to glass. Federal government brought up earlier. Now the code says safety glazing. It doesn't say tempered glass. One of the things I teach people all the time is, especially the inspectors, don't you ever put on your inspection ticket tempered glass required, because you just stole freedom away from my fellow American. You write on that ticket safety glazing required, because safety glazing references a test standard. And so now the world is your oyster. You want to get some old tires and discarded peanut butter and mix it together at 3,000 degrees and smear it on the window and then put it through this test standard and it passes. And then now you can sell all the American people your peanut butter tire smear window product. You couldn't do that before test standards. You would have had to go into the tempered glass industry, right? So now safety glazing, there's films. There's adhesive films you can put on glass that meet the test standards, because test standards promote freedom. So hopefully just a little mind mess with you about how to look at it. In the past, you still had to do what the code told you, because we don't want someone just making up some random glass that is going to hurt people. So you have the freedom in America to invent all kinds of crazy products. And then some people go, but then I hate the code because it forces those products to what? To prove themselves? Well, do you want to spend a bunch of money on a product that didn't prove itself? So there's my positive spin on that.
Yeah. And we're getting close to the end here. Armando's asking us really to ask his question. So I'm going to end with this one because I think that it brings it all back around to what you said before, which is Armando's in Texas. And it says, I often see attics, crawl spaces, wall and roof assemblies with less R value required in the prescriptive code, with reasoning that under the performance code, it is allowed. Too often, performance codes are being used as a cheat option, and the ICC allows it. Shame. The natural laws of physics and chemistry still make those assemblies risky? And I think you talked about it really early on, which is you can't just use one piece. You have to use all the pieces, right?
Yeah. And I completely, I mean, again, I have 20 years in this business in code, and before that in trades. He's absolutely correct. The performance method gets used to bypass. It really does. Now, the code has gotten better. Every new edition of the energy code, they try to recognize when the ways that is being gamed, and they try to adjust it. So they've put in these things recently called backstops. The code doesn't say backstop. We call it that. We saw that. We're essentially saying, hey, you can manipulate, doing UA trade-offs is one way. Performance method allows you to include more features, and then the ERI method. These now are putting in backstops to say, hey, you can manipulate like tighter air sealing for lower insulation, but you can't go lower than this particular level. So that is where I acknowledge that comment as absolutely true. And the code with every edition is trying to change that. When energy codes first bumped the R values in Colorado, where I am, to where everyone had to go to a 2x6 wall prescriptively, all the builders went performance method and stuck with the 2x4 wall. And I mean, and it was plain as day. It was just a way around it. Another story of a friend of mine as a builder, they reduced all their insulation levels above, and they did like massive basement foundation insulation because it was cheaper and easier to install. But obviously that's the least part where energy is being bled out. So that's another way I've known about this being gained. But to that comment, they are the energy code humans involved in creating that, and they are trying to get those options more leveled. They are trying, but you know, it's the work of humans, and so that's why we change the code every 3 years to try to address concerns like I think Mr. Armando brought up.
Yeah, and I think someone else commented in the, because it sends the chat box off when you say something that about using the performance method, because the prescriptive method can often be really risky. And I know you and I have talked about this in the past when we've been places. Is I always say, can we get in the code the reference that they still have to read the IRC section that talks about vapor, right? Because just because it says you can do it here, you still have to do it there because it's a risky assembly if you don't do both of these things, right? And so again, it's
just, yeah, folks got to understand, to try to wrap it up with less words, like what I said at the beginning. A lot of folks look at the code as just telling you what to do. And if you think about it, if you look at that big IRC, and the only way you see it is through a negative lens of the government telling me what to do, these people and creating this stuff that just tells me what to do, then you are setting yourself up to think it's a system, to think it's one cohesive, you do this, and then you expect it all to work together. But that's where I'm saying it's because you have the wrong attitude looking at it. It's not a system for you to just grab and do what it says and that's it. Just do what the code says. No, you got to pick, what do you want to do? And then you got to make sure all those things line up. With more freedom comes more responsibility. Those that don't want to deal with any of that, then hire all your third-party people, and that will increase the cost of construction. And I will admit, as a code guy for 20 years, absolutely, code is responsible for raising the cost of construction. I mean, it increases safety, comfort, durability. Like, there's lots of benefits, but I'm not going to be some Kool-Aid drinker and lie to you. No, absolutely, code continues to drive up the cost of construction. And that's why I encourage you guys to be involved. I've been attending the hearings for 10 years. I argue against people. I mean, I get up there trying to give the voice of we the people, but I need more we the people. Because remember, code gets changed by people that are motivated. What motivates them? Why aren't you changing code? Why aren't you motivated? Right? What motivates you to go spend the time and energy, right? Money. So we, the people, have to sacrifice our time, our energy, if we want a code that represents us, because otherwise it's being created by those that have the time and motivation to do so. And that's just true. And I'm not saying that's all ugly, but every human, we don't know what's in the hearts of humans.
That was a great way to wrap it up.
Before I get myself in trouble.
Well, thank you everybody for joining in. Thank you, Glenn, for sharing your time. As always, this will be up on our YouTube channel. So we're not currently handing out slides from presentations, but you can always go back and rewatch this, and make sure that you check out all of the rest of Glenn's great publications and classes. And, every once in a while you get to see him at one of the symposiums. Send him an email.
Would like to follow up, you're welcome to email me, glenn@buildingcodecollege.com. Two N's on Glenn.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you.